Caleb studies her, torn between duty and compassion. The question burns: what brought her here, and why is she utterly alone? Just as silence settles, the sound of horses galloping tears through the night, outlaws riding hard into Dry Creek. The whistle of the westbound train cut through the dusty afternoon like a cry from another world. Folks in the small town of Dry Creek gathered near the platform, curious about who might arrive on such a lonely stretch of track. When the doors opened, a young woman stepped down, her dress travel-worn but her posture proud. She carried no luggage save for a single leather satchel. Her name was Clara Jameson. Her eyes, though tired, held the kind of quiet fire born from hardship. Yet when she looked around, no one approached, no one called her name, no arms opened to welcome her. She stood alone on the weathered planks, and the silence of that rejection pressed in like the desert heat. Sheriff Caleb Rowe, a widower still carrying grief like an iron weight, watched from across the street. Something in her loneliness struck him deep. He tipped his hat, his boots thudding against the boards as he approached. "Ma'am," he said gently, "looks like no one came to claim you. Dry Creek's no place to be standing alone." Clara's lips parted as if to answer, but the only sound that came was the wail of the train as it pulled away, leaving her truly, utterly stranded. The sheriff offered her lodging, if only for the night. His home sat on the edge of town, a modest cabin weathered by prairie winds. Inside, the faint scent of cedar clung to the walls, and a single rocking chair creaked in the corner, a widow's memory haunting the room. Clara hesitated. To stay under a man's roof, especially one of authority, could stir gossip. Yet where else could she go? The saloon would chew her alive, the boarding house was full, and the desert offered only death. "Thank you, Sheriff," she whispered. "I won't be a burden." That night, as the lantern burned low, Caleb listened to the sound of her moving in the guest room. For the first time in years, his home no longer echoed with emptiness. He stared at his late wife's photograph on the mantel, guilt tugging at him. Could he ever open his heart again? By morning, word spread that Silas McGraw and his gang had stormed the Silver Spur Saloon, demanding protection money. The townsfolk trembled, too afraid to resist. Caleb holstered his Colt, knowing the law alone wouldn't scare men like Silas. Clara, still weary from travel, watched from the window as Caleb strode toward danger. Her hands clenched at her sides. Something in her past mirrored this scene, the strong standing against the cruel, and she felt the old wound throb in her chest. Inside the saloon, the air was thick with cigar smoke and fear. Silas sneered, his scar catching the light. "This town belongs to me now," he declared. Caleb's voice cut sharp. "Not while I'm wearing this badge." The crowd froze as both men eyed each other, fingers twitching near their guns. Clara gasped as the outlaw's hand hovered over his pistol, the town holding its breath. Would Caleb live through this standoff? The draw was faster than lightning. Gunfire split the air, glasses shattered, and the saloon erupted in chaos. Caleb staggered back, clutching his side, a crimson bloom spreading beneath his badge. Silas cursed, retreating with his men, vowing he'd finish the sheriff next time. Clara rushed forward, pushing through the panicked crowd. She had seen blood before, more than she cared to admit, and her hands worked with a precision born of necessity. "Hold still," she commanded, tearing fabric to staunch the wound. Caleb winced but obeyed, staring at this mysterious woman who carried both fire and sorrow in her soul. The townsfolk whispered, "Who was she to tend the sheriff so fearlessly?" Some saw scandal, others saw providence. But for Clara, the only truth was this. She had chosen to stay when no one else dared step forward. As Clara finishes binding the wound, Caleb grips her wrist, his eyes fierce. "Tell me the truth, Clara. What are you running from?" That night, in the sheriff's dimly lit cabin, Clara sat beside him as he fought fever from the wound. His question lingered between them like a drawn blade. "I lost everything," she whispered. "A home, a family, taken by men not so different from Silas McGraw. I came west because I had nowhere left to go." Tears glimmered but did not fall. She refused to break. Caleb, though weak, recognized the steel in her voice. She wasn't merely a woman in need. She was a survivor, carved by hardship into something strong. His chest tightened, not from pain but from the stirrings of something he thought buried with his wife. Outside, coyotes howled at the moon, the prairie wind rattled the shutters, and in the distance, a single rider watched the cabin from the shadows. Silas McGraw wasn't finished. A shadowed hand grips a rifle barrel outside the cabin window, aimed squarely at Clara. The crack of a rifle split the stillness. Clara ducked instinctively as the bullet shattered the lamp beside her, plunging the room into flickering shadows. Caleb groaned, struggling to rise despite the pain in his side. Clara pressed him down. "Stay," she hissed, snatching his revolver from the nightstand with a steadiness that surprised even her. Outside, hoofbeats thundered into the distance, the shooter fleeing into the prairie. Clara's heart raced as she lowered the weapon, her fingers trembling only after the danger had passed. Caleb stared at her, half in awe, half in suspicion. "You've handled a gun before," he muttered. Clara turned away, unwilling to explain. For the first time, Caleb realized she was not a helpless passenger stranded by fate. She was a woman forged by violence. At dawn, Caleb swears he will track the shooter, but Clara insists she must go with him, leaving him to wonder what secrets she still hides. The sun rose in a blaze of orange, painting the desert like fire as Caleb saddled his horse. Clara emerged, hat brim low, a borrowed rifle slung across her shoulder. The townsfolk gathered, whispering at the sight of her riding alongside the sheriff. A widower and a stranger, a scandal ready to ignite. As they rode beyond Dry Creek, the world opened to endless plains and rugged mesas. The silence between them was heavy until Clara finally spoke. "The men who killed my family wore the same brand Silas McGraw's gang carries. A coiled snake." Caleb froze at the revelation. Silas wasn't just a tyrant, he was part of Clara's past. They crested a ridge and spotted riders in the distance. Dark figures moved like wolves across the prairie, their dust trailing long banners in the wind. The McGraw gang was on the move, and Clara's hand instinctively tightened around her rifle. The riders turned suddenly, galloping straight toward them, guns flashing in the rising sun. Gunfire erupted across the open range. Caleb and Clara urged their horses into a desperate sprint, bullets tearing up dirt around them. Clara wheeled her horse with surprising skill, raising her rifle and firing a shot that clipped the hat clean off one outlaw's head. Caleb glanced back, astonished. This was no ordinary woman. They dove into a narrow canyon, using the stone walls for cover. Dust choked the air as hooves thundered past. "They'll circle back," Caleb growled. Clara's eyes burned with determination. "Then let them. I've run from snakes long enough." The gang regrouped at the canyon's mouth, their shadows stretching like demons against the rock. Caleb, weakened by his wound, realized he might not survive another firefight. But Clara knelt beside him, rifle steady, a warrior's calm etched into her face. As the outlaws prepared to storm the canyon, Silas McGraw himself rode forward, his scarred face twisting into a cruel grin as he called Clara's name. "Clara Jameson." Silas's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "Thought you could hide in a little dust-blown town? I told you once, no one leaves the McGraws alive." Clara's blood ran cold. Memories of fire, screams, and her father's ranch burning flashed before her eyes. She steadied her breath, refusing to let him see her fear. Caleb's gaze sharpened. Now he understood. She wasn't merely passing through Dry Creek. She had come west to face the monster who had stolen her life. Silas laughed, the sound like rattlesnake tails in the dust. "You stay with that sheriff, Clara, and you'll watch him die same as your kin." Caleb's hand brushed his revolver, but his strength faltered. He leaned close to Clara. "If I fall, you finish this," he whispered. Clara swallowed hard, knowing what that meant. Silas raised his hand, signaling his gang to charge, the canyon walls about to erupt in blood and gunfire. The canyon exploded with violence. Gunfire ricocheted, echoing like thunder trapped in stone. Caleb fired from cover, every shot measured, but his injury slowed him. Clara, fierce and unflinching, picked off riders as they pressed closer, her face set in grim resolve. Silas himself spurred forward, weaving through the chaos, his revolver blazing. A bullet struck dangerously close to Caleb, sending him sprawling. Clara screamed his name, fury tearing through her. She rose from cover, standing tall against the dust and gunfire, her rifle leveled at the man who had haunted her nightmares. The townsfolk of Dry Creek would later say they heard the shots echo all the way to the railroad tracks. But in that canyon, time seemed to stop as Clara pulled the trigger. Silas reeled back in his saddle, but whether Clara had struck him true, or whether fate had something crueler in store, remained hidden in the smoke and dust. When the gunfire finally died, smoke clung to the canyon like a shroud. Horses whinnied in panic, and the cries of wounded men echoed against the stone. Clara's rifle still smoked in her hands, her breath ragged, her heart pounding like a war drum. Caleb staggered to his feet, blood on his shirt but resolve in his eyes. He grabbed her wrist. "Did you hit him?" Clara searched the haze, but Silas McGraw was gone, vanished like a serpent into the rocks. The outlaw leader lived, and worse, he knew Clara had found her courage. That night, as they camped by a small fire, Caleb caught Clara staring into the flames. "He'll come for you," Caleb murmured. Clara didn't flinch. "Let him. I've been waiting for this reckoning." For the first time, he saw not a lost woman, but a partner forged by fire. A distant coyote's howl was answered by the chilling whistle of Silas's gang, already hunting them through the night. Back in Dry Creek, tongues wagged. The sheriff returning wounded, with a strange woman by his side. It stirred scandal in every corner. Miss Evelyn, the boarding house keeper, muttered, "A widow's bed should stay empty, not filled by the first stray who steps off the train." Caleb ignored the whispers, but Clara felt the sting. She had already been an outsider once, and now the town seemed to sharpen its claws. Yet when she passed the saloon, a few women nodded to her, silent recognition in their eyes. They, too, had lost something to men like Silas McGraw. That evening, as Caleb tried to rest, Clara sat beside his bed, torn between gratitude and guilt. She whispered, "If I hadn't come here, you wouldn't be bleeding." Caleb's hand brushed hers, rough but tender. "If you hadn't come here," he said, voice hoarse, "I'd still be living in an empty house with nothing left but ghosts." Their moment is shattered when a gunshot cracks through the window. Silas's mark has reached the sheriff's very doorstep. Glass rained down as Caleb pulled Clara to the floor, shielding her with his own body despite the fresh wound in his side. Boots pounded outside. The McGraw gang had brought the fight to Dry Creek itself. Clara seized the rifle propped by the door, her eyes blazing with fury. She fired into the night, scattering the attackers. One outlaw fell, the others melted into the shadows, leaving only silence and the faint trail of blood in the dirt. The town awoke to chaos, lanterns flickering as neighbors gathered. Clara stood on the porch, rifle in hand, a streak of soot across her cheek. For the first time, the townsfolk didn't just whisper, they stared in awe. The widow's sheriff wasn't alone anymore. In the morning, a note nailed to the sheriff's door delivers Silas's message. "Meet me at Red Mesa. Bring the girl, or the town burns." The desert stretched endless before them as Caleb and Clara rode out toward Red Mesa. The land was harsh, scattered with mesquite and red rock that glowed like embers under the setting sun. Every mile carried them deeper into Silas McGraw's territory. Caleb's wound throbbed, but he refused to let weakness show. Clara noticed, though. "You shouldn't be riding," she said softly. Caleb's jaw tightened. "I swore an oath to protect this town. And you." Their eyes met, the silence between them thick with unspoken truth. When they reached the mesa, the world seemed to hold its breath. The towering cliffs cast long shadows, and at the center of the clearing, torches burned. Silas and his gang were waiting, their horses restless, their guns gleaming under the blood-red sky. Silas grinned, raising his hand, and from the shadows, another figure emerged. A man Clara never expected to see alive. Clara's breath caught. The man stepping into the firelight bore the same eyes as her father, yet older, harder, scarred. "Nathaniel," she whispered. Her brother, long thought dead in the raid that destroyed their family, now stood at Silas's side. Nathaniel's face was carved with bitterness. "Clara," he said coldly, "I told you to run. But you stayed alive while the rest of us burned. And now you stand with the law." His words were knives, sharper than any outlaw's bullet. Caleb's hand hovered near his gun, uncertain. Clara stepped forward, torn between joy and horror. Her brother had survived, but at what cost? "You don't know what he's done," she pleaded. Nathaniel's jaw clenched. "I know enough. Silas gave me a reason to keep breathing when you had none for me." Silas laughed, throwing his arm around Nathaniel's shoulder. "Blood against blood. Now tell me, Clara, will you kill your own kin to save this sheriff?" The torches at Red Mesa flickered, throwing twisted shadows across the stone. Clara's hands trembled as she stared at Nathaniel. Her brother's eyes, once warm and filled with mischief, were now cold as steel. "Silas saved me," he growled. "When the fire took everything, he pulled me from the wreckage. He's my kin now." Clara's heart broke at the words. "He destroyed us, Nathaniel. Don't you see? He lit that fire." But Nathaniel shook his head, jaw locked, rage choking out reason. Caleb stepped between them, his revolver steady. Blood or not, if he rides with McGraw, he's an outlaw. The gang laughed, savoring the spectacle. Silas leaned close to Nathaniel, his voice like poison. "Let her beg, boy. It'll make the breaking all the sweeter. Clara's stomach twisted. She had found her brother alive, only to discover he'd been twisted into her enemy. Silas raised his hand, signaling his men to seize Clara, while Caleb took aim, knowing one wrong move could kill them all. As the outlaws surged forward, Caleb fired, each shot echoing like thunder across the mesa. Clara ducked, yanking free from rough hands, her own rifle cracking against the night. Chaos erupted. Horses reared, men shouted, torches fell into the dust. In the midst of the fray, Caleb lunged toward Silas, tackling him from his horse. The two men crashed into the dirt, fists flying, knives flashing in the torchlight. Clara's breath caught. This wasn't just a fight of law against outlaw, but of two men bound by hate. Nathaniel's gun lifted, aimed at Caleb's back. Clara screamed, throwing herself between them. The crowd froze. Brother and sister stood eye to eye, the barrel of his pistol inches from her heart. Nathaniel's hand trembled. But was it mercy or vengeance that would guide his trigger? The night seemed to hold its breath. Nathaniel's eyes softened for just a heartbeat, the boy Clara remembered flickering beneath the outlaw's mask. But Silas barked, "Do it! End her!" And in that instant, Nathaniel's gaze hardened again. The gunshot shattered the silence. Clara fell to her knees, clutching her shoulder, blood seeping between her fingers. Caleb roared, tearing free from Silas and firing wildly, driving the gang back. "Clara!" he cried, gathering her into his arms. Nathaniel lowered his smoking gun, his face pale. "She chose you," he muttered, backing away. His voice cracked, but he did not stop. He melted into the night with the rest of the gang, leaving Clara bleeding and Caleb broken with rage. As Clara faded into unconsciousness, Caleb swore before God and man. He would end Silas McGraw, no matter the cost. Clara awoke days later in the doctor's office, her shoulder bandaged tight. Caleb sat nearby, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Relief washed over him as her eyes opened, but the fire in his soul had only grown. Word of the ambush spread through Dry Creek. Some townsfolk whispered that Clara was cursed, that trouble followed her like a shadow. Others praised her bravery, saying she had stood taller than any man against Silas's gang. The divide cut the town in two, loyalists who backed the sheriff, and cowards who wanted peace at any price. Caleb faced the crowd at the courthouse steps. "If we don't stand, Silas will own every ranch, every farm, every soul in this town. I'll fight him alone if I must." Clara, weak but unyielding, stepped to his side. "You won't stand alone," she declared. The crowd erupted in argument, but from the back a familiar voice drawled, "No need, Sheriff. We'll end this our way." Silas's men had infiltrated the town. The first shot rang out, shattering the courthouse window. Panic swept through the streets as Silas's men unleashed chaos. Buildings caught flame, townsfolk scattered, and the once quiet town became a battlefield. Caleb barked orders, rallying those willing to fight. Clara, her shoulder burning with pain, armed herself again. Side by side, they fought through the smoke, protecting the helpless as the outlaws tore through Dry Creek. Amid the fire and blood, Silas appeared at the far end of the street, his silhouette framed by the blaze. He raised his revolver in a mocking salute. "This is just the beginning," he shouted. Then, as if to twist the knife, Nathaniel stepped beside him, rifle in hand. The flames raged higher as Silas and Nathaniel vanished into the smoke, leaving behind a town in ruins and a sheriff with nothing left to lose. The dawn revealed a town scarred beyond recognition. Smoke curled from the smoldering ruins of the saloon, the church steeple leaned crooked, and the streets were littered with broken glass and bloodstains. Dry Creek had survived, but barely. Caleb stood in the middle of Main Street, his badge blackened with soot, his heart heavy with guilt. He had sworn to protect this town, and now half of it lay in ruins. Clara limped to his side, her bandaged shoulder stiff but her gaze unwavering. "You can't carry this alone," she told him softly. But Caleb only shook his head. "They trusted me, Clara, and Silas made me look powerless." The townsfolk gathered, their faces pale with fear. Some looked at Caleb with hope, others with blame. The divide widened like a canyon. As silence fell, a rider galloped in from the prairie, bearing grim news. Silas was gathering every outlaw within 50 miles for one final strike. Caleb gathered the men of Dry Creek in the dim light of the church, its charred beams creaking above them. "Silas wants a war," he said, his voice steady despite the ache in his soul. "And if we don't give him one, he'll burn us all." Some nodded, determination hardening their jaws. Others shook their heads, muttering about surrender. You can't win against McGraw, one man spat. He's got an army, Sheriff. We've got a handful of farmers and shopkeepers. Clara stepped forward, her eyes blazing. Then we fight smarter. Silas thrives on fear. Let's take that from him. Her words carried weight, and for a moment, even the doubters fell silent. Caleb looked at her. This woman who had arrived with nothing now stood as the heart of their resistance. As plans were drawn, a crash shattered the church's windows. A note wrapped around a knife slammed into the pulpit. Sundown. The canyon. Surrender her, or every soul in Dry Creek dies. Night fell heavy over the desert. Caleb sat alone on the sheriff's porch, polishing his revolver with slow, deliberate motions. Clara approached quietly, the lantern light catching the softness in her eyes. You can't give me to him, she whispered. Caleb's jaw tightened. If it saves the town, she cut him off fierce. Don't you dare. You'd be handing him victory, and you'd never forgive yourself. The silence stretched between them, thick with longing and fear. At last, Caleb's hand brushed hers. I lost my wife to fever. I thought my heart was buried with her. But then you came, Clara, and I found I could feel again. I won't lose you, not to him, not to anyone. Tears filled her eyes, and for the first time, she let herself lean into him, his arms strong around her. Their embrace was broken by the sound of a gun cocking. Nathaniel stepped from the shadows, rifle raised, his face twisted with torment. Nathaniel's rifle gleamed in the lantern light. His voice was raw, trembling between anger and sorrow. Come with me, Clara. Leave this town, leave him. Silas swears he'll spare Dry Creek if you do. Clara's heart ached at the sight of him. Her brother, lost to darkness yet still reaching for her. You don't see it, Nathaniel. He'll never stop. He'll bleed this land dry until nothing's left. Caleb's hand hovered over his revolver, but Clara raised her palm to stop him. This was her fight. Nathaniel's eyes glistened, a flash of the boy he once was. I can't lose you again, he whispered. Clara stepped closer, her voice breaking. Then choose, Nathaniel. Family, or the devil who owns you. Nathaniel's finger trembled on the trigger as the church bell tolled midnight, signaling Silas's riders closing in fast. Thunder rolled across the desert, though the sky was clear. It was the sound of hooves, dozens, maybe hundreds, pounding toward Dry Creek. Torches burned like a river of fire as Silas McGraw's army of outlaws advanced. Caleb rallied what defenders he could. Farmers clutching rifles, merchants with shotguns, boys barely old enough to shave. Clara stood among them, rifle steady, her wound aching but her spirit fierce. This is our home, she told them. We fight or we burn. From the ridge above town, Silas reined in his horse, Nathaniel at his side, torn but silent. The outlaw leader raised his revolver high, his voice booming across the plains. Tonight, Dry Creek falls. As the outlaws charged, Caleb and Clara braced for the fight of their lives. While Nathaniel raised his rifle, his sights locked not on Caleb, but on his own sister. The night exploded with thunder as the outlaws stormed into Dry Creek, their torches hurling sparks into the dry wind. Gunfire cracked from rooftops and windows, the defenders holding their ground with desperate resolve. Caleb fought like a man possessed, his revolver spitting fire, his voice shouting orders above the chaos. Clara stood shoulder to shoulder with him, her rifle steady, picking targets with deadly precision. You're not taking my home, she cried as another outlaw fell. The townsfolk, inspired by her ferocity, rallied with newfound courage. But amid the storm, Nathaniel prowled the shadows, torn between blood and bond. His rifle sight hovered on Clara, his finger trembling. Silas barked orders at his men, his laughter carrying over the screams. As Clara reloaded, Nathaniel fired, and the bullet struck someone standing behind her. The man fell hard into the dust. It was Sheriff Caleb. Clara screamed, dropping to his side, her hands pressing against the wound in his chest. Blood seeped through her fingers, hot and merciless. Caleb's eyes fluttered, his voice a rasp. Don't let them win. Nathaniel froze, horror spreading across his face. He hadn't meant to strike Caleb. Silas, however, roared with approval. That's my boy, he bellowed, his riders surging forward with ruthless abandon. Clara dragged Caleb toward cover, her heart breaking with every faltering breath he took. Stay with me, she pleaded, tears streaking her cheeks. The townsfolk saw their sheriff fall, and panic rippled through the line of defenders. Clara looked up through the smoke and flames. Silas himself was riding straight for her, his revolver aimed at her heart. Silas bore down on Clara, his revolver gleaming. Nathaniel rode at his side, but his face was carved with anguish. Clara rose, rifle in hand, but her wound slowed her, her aim wavering. Silas sneered. You should have stayed gone, girl. I'll bury you in the dirt you love so much. He pulled the trigger, only for the shot to ring wide. Nathaniel had knocked his arm aside. The outlaws hesitated, confusion rippling through their ranks. Silas turned on Nathaniel, fury blazing. You betray me? Nathaniel's voice cracked. You never gave me a choice. But she's my blood. His rifle rose, his loyalty finally broken. Father and son, or master and servant, locked eyes in the burning chaos, each with a gun leveled at the other. The battlefield fell eerily silent as Silas and Nathaniel faced off. Even the outlaws paused, waiting to see who would fire first. Clara stood frozen, torn between hope and dread. Shoot him, boy, Silas growled. Prove you're mine. Nathaniel's jaw trembled, his hands slick with sweat. I'm not yours, he said softly. Then the guns roared. 2 shots rang out, echoing through the canyon walls. Silas staggered, a dark bloom spreading across his chest. Nathaniel dropped to his knees, clutching his own wound, blood staining his shirt. Father and son collapsed almost in unison, their feud ending in crimson silence. The outlaws, leaderless, faltered. Some fled into the desert. Others dropped their weapons in surrender. Clara rushed to Nathaniel's side, her tears falling freely. Stay with me, brother, she begged. He smiled faintly. I finally came home. Nathaniel's breath rattled one last time. While behind Clara, Silas stirred, his revolver still clutched in his hand. The first light of dawn spilled over the wreckage of Dry Creek, painting the sky in hues of red and gold. Clara knelt in the dirt, Caleb beside her, his wound bound but not fatal. Together they watched Silas McGraw take his final breath, the outlaw king at last silenced. The town was battered but not broken. Survivors emerged from hiding, their weary faces lifting with relief. Clara stood tall, her hands still trembling but her spirit unshaken. She had arrived a stranger, abandoned and alone. Now, through fire and blood, she had become the heart of Dry Creek. Caleb took her hand, his eyes heavy with pain but also with something gentler. You gave me a reason to fight again, a reason to live. Clara's voice caught in her throat, but she answered with a trembling smile. And you gave me a reason to stay. As the sun rose, painting the desert in light, Dry Creek began to rebuild. Love and loss had scarred them, but out of the ashes, hope burned brighter than ever. In the Wild West, where blood often watered the dust, sometimes love could still take root and endure.